There we go. Lovely. All right.
Very
Hi,
good.
everyone. We'll get started. Uh, I'm Beck. I'm from the city of Stonington, and I'd like to start off with
You can take them off
acknowledging.
screen.
Oh,
Sorry, Kath, could you mute yourself, please?
that's okay. I'll mute you. There we
Thank
go.
you.
Start off with acknowledging the traditional owners on the lands on which we're all meeting tonight. It's vast and wide, but for Stonington, it's the Wurundjeri, Wurrung, and Bunurong people. And I want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, as well as extending that respect to any Indigenous people who might be joining us tonight. We acknowledge their living connection to country, relationship with the land, and all living things, extending back thousands of years for all Indigenous people. Again, thank you for coming along to tonight's webinar on growing fruit in small spaces. It's going to be a really great topic to cover. It's a part of the My Smart Garden program. If you haven't heard of us before, we're a collaborative program between 11 Metro Melbourne councils, and we aim to help residents grow their own food, increase the resilience in a changing climate, reduce your waste and water use. A little bit of housekeeping. Please mute yourself, especially while the presenter is talking. Feel free to enter any questions into the chat box. I'll be helping to navigate that as we go through the presentation. And we're recording tonight's session, so you'll be able to watch it back later on. It's going to be made available on the My Smart Garden website. So if you're stressed about missing anything, yeah, don't worry, you can watch it back, but we'll do our best to keep up with all of the questions. And I would now like to introduce Scott Hitchens, who's our presenter for tonight's session. Scott does a lot of the My Smart Garden workshops and webinars. So if you've been around before, you're probably quite familiar with his excellent work. He's a passionate sustainable gardening expert, educator, and a founding member of the Werribee Park Heritage Orchard. So, Scott, I will pass it over to you.
Okay. Thanks for coming straight after work, folks. I hope you managed to grab some dinner before you started and perhaps a glass of wine. I'll have to save mine till after because first thing to go is my mouth. So let's get on to it. So we're talking about growing fruit in small spaces. Obviously, nearly all the stuff I'm talking about tonight does apply to things like herbs and vegetables as well. So you certainly don't need to limit yourself to growing just fruit, but also find that many people who do like to grow on their balconies limit themselves before they get to fruit, which is why this should be an interesting little workshop for us. Um, Now, with questions, if you put them in the chat function, and Beck will field them, and I'll sort of try to answer them before I move on to the next slide. We may have to push things along a bit. Depends how we go, but I'll do my best to answer questions related to the slide that we're on at the time. Okay, so are there any questions yet? Hope not, Beck. No, just
No,
where
not yet.
people are from. Okay,
Yep, ready to get
all
into
right.
it.
Let's go then. If I can get this to go down a page. There we are. Okay, a few caveats. This is me covering my butt. Just keep in mind when you're planning a courtyard on a balcony or another small space, but particularly a balcony, um, that the weight of pots full of potting mix and water can really add up to quite a bit more than that balcony is being built for. Um, they do tend to very heavily over engineer balconies in Australia. So you've got a fair bit of leeway, but do be aware that it does weigh quite a lot. And that boy in the swimming pool in the photo there, I calculated that's about nearly three and a quarter tons of water he's got sitting there at a very rough calculation. It does add up really quickly. Now I'm going to use balconies as the example quite a lot tonight, um, but everything applies to uh, courtyards, small gardens, and if you've got more garden space than a balcony, then you can just multiply this out further and further and do more and more of it. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay, so the most important thing is location, 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 as they always say in the classics. Um, and the key point about location for your garden is going to be where the sun shines from. Now, we all know the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But in this hemisphere, it travels through the northern part of the sky. And I'm saying in this hemisphere because just be careful when you're reading overseas garden books, particularly the ones from Royal Horticultural Society, good though they are, they sometimes mess up in translating things across to Australian, and they'll tell you that the sun shines from the south. And that's certainly, well, if that does happen here, you're in bigger trouble than having a balcony garden. Um, Looking at the photo here, a key point here is yes, sun's vital, but if you look at the photo, so I'm just moving everyone else's pictures out of my view at the moment. If you look at that photo, that entire deck they're sitting on is in shade. But if you look at the growing space, and we don't know what time of day this is, I'd say it's either fairly early or fairly late, given the length of the shadows. But even if you're looking at your balcony or your garden, if that's too shady, but then have a look at this wall behind them. There's a whole lot of growing space on this wall behind them that is going to be fantastic for growing on. And of course, the more you grow on it, the more privacy you're going to get and the more fruit. On the other hand, if the sun is shining from the other side of that fence, then the more we grow on it, the more it's going to shade other parts of the garden. So get out there with a few times during the day, see where the sun is shining. If it's just making its way over the top of the house next door to reach your balcony, then in winter it may be below that. But get out there and plan it by being out there, okay, at different times of the day, ideally different times of the year, and work out where those sunny spots are, or where those little less sunny spots are, and even spots that don't get sun at all in winter, but do in summer. That's what deciduous trees are for. Any questions on that?
Yeah, we've just got one in terms of location. Claudia's just wondering, I guess, about general advice for a north facing garden, because a lot of things seem to be copping the heat.
Yep. A good general one, if you can manage it, is to put a deciduous vine over the top of the balcony. So the ceiling above you, if there is one, when you're standing on the balcony, if you run some hooks across that or a cable, and then grow a grapevine up to it and across that and let it hang down. And as the weather gets hotter, you'll get more shade going. And then every year you clip that vine back to the bit going across the top, and anything coming off that, you cut it back to two or three buds. So you get heaps of winter sun come through, but you're blocking that summer sun. And consider where the shade is and prune appropriately where you want the shade. And look, that shade will often help stuff in a particularly hot balcony. Because the converse of that is going to be if you're not getting any sun at all, very little sun. But that's why the looking above the sorry, looking above the floor space is really important. Okay.
Great.
Which leads us on to thinking in 3D. Sorry, I'm just having a bit of charger problems here. It's telling me bad things. I think we're okay. Okay. So when looking at a courtyard balcony with a garden behind, most people just see the square meters. You need to think about the cubic meters. Look at it in 3D, not necessarily thinking outside the box, but thinking about all parts of the box. Now, again, those caveats, make sure that those plants growing on the balcony rail don't fall off. It's a really good way to lose friends to have them walk underneath that. Um, so it is important that you make those very stable, but um, there's a lot of fixtures and stuff that you can use to grow stuff on the outside and the inside of that balcony rail. It can be a little more difficult to grow if you've got, say, a solid brick balcony rail, but it also provides you with other spots to do other things. If you look at the photo, you can see that there's stuff growing overhead, and certainly they could fit a lot more on that spot. That wall could be totally covered in pots, or it might be totally covered in rain guttering. That's PVC rain guttering. That's cut to size, and you can buy the mounting clips to go with it, and you can have racks and racks of strawberries and other things growing on it like that. If you're at ground level, you can also borrow other space. If your balcony's down at ground level or you're in a courtyard, it's a good way to get that grapevine in particular, but other plants as well, get them in and then grow them up until they're on your balcony. That way the root system's down in the ground, not bothering anyone, but you've got all the advantages of that plant as it reaches up to your balcony. And something like a grapevine, the root run is goes down a long way, but it doesn't spread out very far at all. You'd only need a tiny little patch, like pulling out one paver if you can get away with it. Keep in mind too that even things like the trees in a neighbouring house, how they shade your garden at different times, but they also give you that green backdrop as well. So when you're looking at planning that garden, then make sure that you consider beyond it as well, what things you can make use of either visually or as maybe even encourage things to hang over and grow there. Other thing is too, a lot of balconies and courtyard gardens are great little microclimates, meaning that the temperature there is higher than the surrounding area. So if you get a forecast of frost in your area, you'll probably go out in a small courtyard, particularly one that's surrounded by concrete and brick, and find that it's there's just no frost in your area as well. So keep an eye out for things like that, particularly with north-facing walls. Those sort of masonry-based walls and the like are great spots if they're facing the sun. And to the point where, well, I've seen bananas growing in Melbourne in quite a few places and avocados, but you could even get it go as far as growing coffee and mangoes in the right spot because you do get that microclimate, that shelter from the cold wind, that blocking of frost because frost tends to flow, and that blocking of damaging winds. So you need to plant beyond the floor, okay, and all the way up. Any questions, Beck?
Yeah, there's one great question, I guess, around using additional hanging space. So, some
Yep.
suggestions for things in hanging pots.
Yep, I've got a few suggestions coming along. In terms of
Okay.
fruit, probably one of the absolute best is strawberries for hanging baskets. You can get the half round ones, which go very nicely on a wall. And I've seen them done in a few spots where you put those half baskets on, fix them to the wall, and another one directly below that, and further all the way down, so that you water the top one, and it goes through the whole system each time. And not just water runs down through, but you also get nutrients following it. And then right at the bottom, you set up a bit of a tray, and you have mint growing in it. So every bit of the wall and every bit of nutrient and water you're applying to it does get used. Beyond fruit, of course, there's things like all sorts of herbs and lettuces and all sorts can be grown in hanging baskets as well. I find they can be a little bit fiddly, and I do prefer growing um, longer lasting things rather than annuals. But strawberries certainly fit into that field as well. And you can end up with, just above your head height, a whole field full of strawberries hanging down, and you just reach up and pick them.
I guess the thing with hanging things, and from my experience, they tend to dry out quicker than others. So it's just
They
important to
do,
keep the
particularly the
water up.
old-fashioned Hessian, or
Mm.
coconut fiber lined ones. What I do is put a smallish square of plastic in the bottom before I fill them, and that creates a little reservoir of water in the bottom. So not
Excellent.
not plastic lining the whole thing, you'll kill your plant, but just if it's if the hanging basket is about the size of a basketball, then you'd probably put a piece of plastic that's, I don't know, 150 to 200 mil square in the bottom of it. And that just gives you that little dip in the bottom that holds the water in and it can be drawn back up by the plant.
Great.
Let's move on. Okay, so this, look at the sort of things that you can use to grow stuff in. I mean, pots are fine, but they're expensive. Ceramic ones are really heavy and expensive. And don't forget, if you're not on the ground floor, you've got to get them up there as well. If you've got an elevator, that can help. But if you're up and down the elevator for all day with pots and Potamix and everything, get a trolley. But there's plenty of great looking pots that are plastic or even ones that are ceramic but with fiberglass through them as well. They're about a quarter of the weight. Okay. But then there's a whole lot of other things that you can use. One of my favorites, and we've got the strawberries growing them here, is those polystyrene fruit boxes. That they have, broccoli boxes, they're often called. They have drainage already in them, although you can get ones with no drainage, which can be used as well, as long as so you can sit pots in them. They don't break down in the sun, which is good in this situation, but bad in an environment situation. They are food safe and they're free. Now, those big white boxes might look a bit dodgy though, but you can either just have so much greenery around them that they're hidden, or paint them with some paints. Get your kids or grandkids over and get them to paint the fronts of them, and even things like a bit of leftover floating flooring, the fake wooden floors and stuff. A bit of that in front of them, or some other thin timber, so will also make them sort of blend in a whole lot better. And they are light enough too that you can also stack them like steps. So you have that arc going up the wall so that you're capturing every last bit of sun. Um, don't forget to use things like you can see there. We'll pull out the old gum boots and coffee mugs and a rather nice looking soup tureen there. Of course, there is the issue of drainage in those. And sometimes in those, just a hole in the bottom is not going to be enough because you block it by putting them on the ground. But there's certainly a lot you can do to enhance them and make them into growing spots. Even if you're just using them as something a little bit better looking than a black plastic pot, but you've still got the black plastic pot inside them, which means you can lift it out, check the drainage, and it's nice and light, but it doesn't look like a plastic pot. I suppose no questions on those ones.
There was a question around wicking pots. I'm not sure if you're going to get to that later or if you want to answer that
Yeah,
now.
I'll cover that now. Look, there's a whole lot of sort of wicking sort of pots around. Even the hanging baskets with a bit of plastic in them are a wicking pot in essence. So there are ready-made ones, but there's also a heap. If you go YouTubing, you'll find a heap of ways to make your own wicking beds. And the good thing about them is that if you go away a bit, you can top them up really nicely, and then you can come back to a nice green garden instead of a brown one. But
Yeah, I
look,
think.
so
Oh,
they
go
are
ahead, Scott.
useful, but the ready-made ones can be very expensive.
I think we've got some notes on the My Smart Garden page about making your own
Oh,
wicking
excellent.
pots too. I'll see if I can find those and I'll put them in the chat.
Great. Also be aware too that some of those pots where they have the bit in the bottom and you water in through a slot in the side, it's worth gluing a bit of shade cloth in them before you fill them, just to stop the mosquitoes from getting in and breeding. Just like saucers underneath pots, if the water sits there for more than about 5, 6 days, depending on the weather, you will get mosquitoes growing and neighbours complaining.
What sort
Neighbours.
of potting mix do you use for those hanging baskets if you put strawberries in it?
I'll come to potting mixes a little bit later on.
So would you suggest lining the hanging basket with shade cloth or something to stop the soil falling out?
Yeah, it depends on what it's made of already. With the polystyrene boxes, I put something like a bit of one layer of newspaper in them, and by the time that breaks through, the potting mix is settled in nicely.
Okay, thank you.
And there we are, potting mix. Now, I know some of you will already know this, but when you go to the Big Green Shed or other places to buy bags of potting mix, the key point that indicates the quality is not the price. It's these Australian standard certifications on the bag. You will get some bags without these, and they're not much more than composted pine bark. That's not bad for breaking up clay soil a bit when you're planting trees, but not much good for anything else. So the Australian standard on potting mix, that's we have the black background ticks, which is standard potting mix, and then you have the red background, which is the premium potting mix. The only difference in the standards between them is the red one has at least 3 months worth of plant food in it. However, you can certainly add plenty of plant foods of your own. Okay, ideally organic ones. Okay, so when you're buying potting mix, um, ignore the prices, look at the labels. Some of the ones the very fancy ones might have a few water crystals in them and things like that that aren't covered by the standards, but nothing that you can't save a lot of money by adding yourself. I don't like using brand names, but that Large Green Shed place has their own line now of potting mixes, and I tend to buy their red tick one for most things where I need to use potting mix. And of course, once you've finished with potting mix after a year or a couple of years, depending on what you're growing in it, don't forget that you don't throw it in the bin, you compost it so that it comes through again nicely refreshed. Now, perlite is um, it's a mineral. I think it's mostly mica, but it's been expanded like rice bubbles. So what it is, they heat it up under pressure, and they suddenly release that pressure, and that causes it to puff up. So it's like popcorn and rice bubbles do. Now, perlite is inert, so it's not going to interact with your plants. It's just an expanded mineral. The beauty of it is you can mix it up to 50-50 with your potting mix and make that potting mix a heck of a lot lighter if weight is a consideration in bigger pots and things like that. Don't buy little bags of perlite from the shop, from the nursery or whatever. Go to a hydroponics store and get the 100-litre bags. I think for 100 litres, it's $20 to $40 these days, depending on where you get it from. And of course, that'll last for a heck of a long time. And if you want to build a wood-fired oven in your little garden as well, the perlite's also great as an insulator. Do be aware though that it's until it's damp, it's best to wear a dust mask when you're handling it. What I generally do is just open the bag a bit and shove the hose in and make sure it's nice and wet. It's not an ongoing problem. Now, fertilizers. Now, where possible, use organic fertilizers, because if you're not, you might as well go to the supermarket. And you know what supermarket tomatoes are like, and most of their fruit, particularly with the berries and soft fruit, you can't buy them fully ripe in the supermarkets simply because they don't travel well. And some of the berries and things we'll look at later, the only way to eat them fully ripe is from picking them from your own garden. Okay. So some organic fertilizers, they can pong a bit for a while, but most of them it's fairly brief. Um, I tend to recommend chicken poo pellets. There's two brands on the market that I'm aware of, which is Dynamic Lifter and Rooster Booster, and they've both got their positives, and they're both made from chicken poo from egg farms and meat farms that would otherwise go to landfill. So they're a good thing to use. I find that the Rooster Booster is per kilo a bit cheaper, but while it's got cultured microorganisms in it, the Dynamic Lifter has fish emulsion and seaweed in it. So swings and roundabouts. Now that can, when you first spread that out, that can get a little smelly if you're in a small space. So have a bit of something like dried lawn clippings or some sugarcane mulch or whatever, just to put a layer over the top of it when you put it into the pots. And that really does stop the smell quite effectively. And if the neighbours complain, just go, "Oh, I smelt that too. I wonder where it's coming from." And by the time they've worked it all out, the smell's gone. But do keep a lid on the bucket and or put it in a bucket, keep the lid on the part that you haven't used yet, and don't leave it in your partner's car on a hot summer day, or do if it's been one of those sort of weeks. Pest control on a small garden or balcony is for the most part pretty easy because you can just stand there with your morning coffee in one hand and squish things with the other hand. And really, just a bit of squishing is all you need to do. If you get a really bad situation where everything's just been eaten alive or destroyed by, say, aphids, then Google a white oil recipe. You can buy a product called Eco Oil, but that's just a commercial type of white oil that uses a petroleum-derived oil instead of veggie oil. The recipe on the Gardening Australia page is really good. Like it's simple, clear, and it's just veggie oil, which can be used. Um, any vegetable oil, so canola, veggie, generally sunflower, olive oil, whatever, and some soap and some water. And you can make it up as a concentrate and just put it in one of those $1.50 spray packs and spray it and listen to the aphids and other little sucking creatures, listen to them scream and die as they suffocate. It's a really good thing to do with breakfast. So a couple of hits of that over, at the start of the week and again towards the end will deal with any of the tiny stuff that's too hard to just generally squish. Remember, on the other hand, though, if you kill every single aphid, there's no reason for any predator or insect to turn up and do the work for you. So do try to maintain a balance. And that's why rule of thumb is good, because if you squash 80 to 90% of the aphids that are on a plant, then you've got rid of enough that they're not going to do any damage, but there's enough there to attract the predators to come and keep them in control. If you get rid of all of them by spraying, particularly with a chemical spray, then you're leaving a nice clear space for a whole lot more aphids to come along. So you just, it's like I won't get political, but it's like clearing a country out and putting a whole lot of new people in it. Okay. So look, it's easy to make, and it's probably the only thing you'd need in a small garden like that, your thumbs and the white oil. If you want to make it a little more fancy, with the water that you're adding to it, boil up some onions and some chilies in it first, and then strain those out and use that as the water that you add. Any questions, Beck?
Yeah, we've had quite a few.
Oh, good.
So Maureen is having some issues with some bigger and furrier pests, rats and possums. Any
Yep.
tips?
Okay. Difficult, and there's a small range of things that you can do. Obviously, the rats aren't from your place; they're from those neighbours next door. You know the ones we're talking about, and they're very often in things like sheds and garages that are full of junk and things like that. It can be difficult to deal with them. Please try not to deal with them by putting out poisons because you're going to be killing things like owls. And there are quite a few more of them around than you may realise, particularly in the inner suburbs.
Yep.
And it's the owls that do the eating of these rats and mice and things anyway. Um, a few tricks that you can use. I mean, you can set out traps. If you've got pets, I make a little tunnel out of wire, like chicken wire, just bend it into a cylinder or that I can put the trap in the bottom of, bit of peanut butter on it, and that generally puts a good dent in the population quite quickly. With the possums, um, the only thing down at Werribee Mansion Orchard, the only thing that we've ever found works ongoing is an item called Pond Guard. Now, it is being sold under other names, but basically it's a jet sprinkler that shoots a jet of water when it detects movement. So it's got one of those little movement sensors like you have on the, at your front door to turn the light on. It's got one of those. It's got a few, the good ones have a few settings for sensitivity, and you can angle the head down and change it so it doesn't shoot off water every time a tree moves. And you can also set it so it turns off at, say 7 o'clock in the morning, so you don't get shot when you go out in the morning. And that's quite good for possums. Um, and you just leave that connected up with a hose and a couple of little AA batteries in it. That's the only thing we'll find that works well. But other things you can do is work out where the highway is that the possums are using. So it might be a branch hanging over from a large tree. It's commonly very often the fence. You'll see them running along the fence, and those spots you can put things like get some dog hair, put it in, say, something like an onion bag or something like that, and tuck that into the top of the fence. If you really want to be fancy, catch yourself a fox and rub some foxwear along the top of the fence. But if you can manage to do that, I think possums are the least of your trouble. Um, but just dog hair and including in the trees and that where they're climbing up, where possible, remove branches and things that they're using as part of their highway to get across to your garden, and just try and do it like that. There is no completely safe method. It is now illegal to remove possums from your property. You can catch them and release them, and that's a good way to get a possum give you a smug smile as it walks off. But if they're in a roof or something, you can catch them to get them out, seal where they're getting in, and then let them go again. But if the old trick they used to do was take the cage with a possum in it across a river so they couldn't come back again. But studies are very clear that they always die when you do that. And you're just clearing a spot for more possums to move in. They are a bit of a pain. You can bag things and you can put smelly stuff around and, like mothballs and that sort of stuff. And you can come to an agreement with them by doing stuff like that where they don't get everything. I remember they're only taking it because they're hungry. Also, to encourage planting of fruiting natives on the nature strip, because they will always prefer the native stuff to your fruit. Like I have fruit bats regularly visit the gum trees on my nature strip, but they never come into my yard to eat the fruit. They're just interested when the lemon scented gum out the front is flowering. I'll hear them crash land in the tree every night.
Julie's just wanting to confirm as well that perlite can be composted.
No, it's very stable, but that's a good thing. I mean, you don't want it to break down, so it'll always be there. It has been used for decades or more than decades to open up soils. You'll commonly find it in potting mix, but no, it will definitely not break down. But the fact that it's in your compost and stuff is not going to cause you a problem.
Yep.
It can go back into the garden as it comes out of there. Okay. Polystyrene also doesn't break down. If any of you are worried about um, chemical danger from that, the old styrene was would contaminate things like coffee and stuff when you have hot drinks in it and so on. But polystyrene, the whole beauty of that is it doesn't break down and release those chemicals. The downside of that is that it doesn't break down. So giving it some life, producing life on your balcony is a great way to get a bit more use out of it.
And I think when we were talking about organic fertilizers, Claudia's
Mhm.
just wondering what some examples of those organic types of fertilizers would be.
Okay. So look, the two most common are the chicken poo pellets. If you're living in a small space, they come in three different size bags. If you get the really big bag, it's the best value, but you've got to store it somewhere. Um, the best thing to use is compost from your own home. If you can compost or have a worm farm or a bokashi bucket, they really should do a workshop on this on Sunday, shouldn't they? And out at where is it? Phoenix Community Centre.
Yeah.
I'll see you all there, folks. Um, Select a composting method that works for the space that you've got and the lifestyle you have, and that is by far the best stuff. It's slower acting, but it doesn't give a big hit of nitrogen that gives you a quick growth of fleshy, weak leaves that the bugs love to eat. So
We've oh sorry, keep going, Scott.
yeah, compost is all should always be your first choice.
Scott and I were just talking because there's a couple of small space composting events coming up this weekend, actually.
Yep.
So there's one in Footscray, and Scott and I are hosting another one in Malvern. So if you're interested in learning more, please come along. Okay, there's a lot of questions. Let me just check where I'm up to. Uh, Oh, yeah. So Julianne's just confirming. So you dispose of perlite into the garden bed. I think you said, though, that it'll be fine in the
It's not going
compost.
to it's not going to
Mm.
interact with anything else. It's yeah it's there, and it is just an expanded mineral. I think it's mica or something like that. Um, there is no danger from it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. All right.
It's a bit like the clay beads, that expanded clay beads that you use in hydroponics. I find them in my garden all the time now. Okay, we'll move on. Oh, look at that picture there. Okay, there's not much fruit in that picture, but just consider when you're designing the garden, there does need to be space for people. You know how many people. Sometimes it's nice to only have one chair out there so the other person can't come out and sit with you. But sometimes having the second chair there is a good idea. And really, it doesn't take much for a small table and chair to be there, for you just to immerse yourself in that garden. It doesn't take up much space. One of my favorite things to do in garden design in smaller gardens like courtyards is to build garden beds out of sleepers, and I'll build them 2 sleepers high, and on one edge I'll put a sleeper flat on top. Now that gives us a height of 450 mils, which is chair height. So the beds are also seats, and really that takes up no space whatsoever in terms of seating. But you get both seating and you get uh, your garden beds. Of course, on a balcony, that may be a little heavy, but it's an option to consider. I would always make sure that I do put a chair in, even if it's just a cheap folding chair, that you have just inside the door that you pop out when you want to go out there. But make sure you've got somewhere to put your coffee in the morning and your other beverage in the evening. Okay. Consider other things too. If you're going to have a little barbecue out there, sometimes it is, you need to leave it out there. Sometimes it's a matter of just having the table to pop it onto. Do you need somewhere we can run a quick, portable clothesline or clothes horses? Do you have cats and dogs and things that are going to interact in sometimes unfortunate ways with what you're growing? Keep all those sort of things in mind when you're planning. Don't exclude any of those things from your balcony. You can fit them in and still have room for anything else. But it's nice if you can generally sort of pop them out of the way and make best use of your space. Any questions?
No, not on this topic.
Good. So what fruit trees can we put in pots? Well, these days, sorry, I've got a very old dog hanging around my feet, and she's mostly deaf and blind, so you'll hear her at some stage. Um, Look, these days, most varieties of fruit, particularly your citrus, but also a lot of your stone fruit and your pomes, such as apples and pears, they will come in versions where they're on a rootstock, so a base that they've been grafted onto that keeps them down to a small size. Okay? I really want you to understand, though, when you're buying these things, that you can't always trust them that they stay small. Okay? in wholesale nurseries, a dwarf fruit tree is something that would go in an orchard and could reach 4 to 5 meters. The problem is the true miniatures, such as those in the photos and the things that the ones that we're talking about. The problem with them is that in the retail nurseries, they call them dwarfs. So if you hear the term dwarf, don't automatically assume that it will fit. Okay, it's check on the label. It'll have a little diagram of how big it grows, and don't assume just because it's a dwarf, it's going to say small. On the other hand, if you're willing to get out with the secateurs often enough and prune the top and the root system, then you can grow any fruit in a pot. Okay? But there are an enormous range of smaller fruit trees now, because there is an enormous range of smaller gardens out there. And so the nursery industry has responded, as is good business. And so you will find things like patio lemons and patio limes. What you need to do with those is actually work out what variety they are. So if you get a patio lemon that's a Meyer lemon, well, they're not very lemony. So you need to know, you need to know what the actual variety is. There is the possibility too of you buying rootstock and grafting stuff onto them. You can buy rootstock that will make things into true miniatures. For example, with citrus, there's Flying Dragon rootstock, and for apples, there's B9 rootstock, which will make them into those sort of trees. And be aware too that some of these miniatures you have to follow different pruning instructions. They're not. If you buy a miniature pear tree and you look up how to prune pears, it's not the same on some of those miniatures. They fruit in different ways. There's some weird stuff out there too. But if you really want something that's going to fit, you'll most likely find it out there. But they do cost a lot, far more than a pair of secateurs and a busy mind working on roots and stuff and pruning them back. Okay, but do check those labels and do question the use of the term dwarf. Any questions on that one?
Yeah, so there's some from earlier. Oops, someone was wondering about passion fruit in small
Yep,
spaces.
I'll talk about them when I talk about vines.
Great. We've got people interested in brambles in pots.
I'll talk about them when I talk about berries.
Excellent.
So
All
I'm
right, well maybe
anticipating
we'll
this.
maybe we'll keep moving on then.
Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Well, just keep in mind too that here's some citrus here. Just keep in mind that if you've got a miniature, say, orange tree, you'll get a surprising amount of fruit on it, but you're not going to be eating oranges off it all season. Okay. Whereas something like I always recommend the first thing in any garden if is a lemon tree, and that should be closest to the kitchen door, within reach. If it's raining and you got your pink fluffy slippers on, okay. So a lemon tree is a great place to start. The reason being that you generally don't go out and pick all the lemons at once when they're ripe, like you do with, say, apples or plums or anything. You go out and you pick a lemon or two when you need them. Okay, so having a lemon tree on your balcony or in your courtyard is a really great way to have something from the garden going into a heck of a lot of your meals, and something is always going to go there. And a bit of lemon, like I tend to use more lemon zest than actual than the juice these days. And so even with winter coming on, if a nice rich stew can be really livened up at the end by putting in a gremolata, which is this lemon zest, garlic, and parsley all chopped up together, just to give us balance that with a bit of real freshness um, after that long cooking time. The lemon I always tend to recommend is a variety called Eureka. It's moderately easy to grow. but the main thing about it is it'll have lemons on it pretty much all year. Sad to say, my 30-year-old Eureka lemon tree just suddenly turned up its toes this week and has died.
Ooh.
So we will hold a minute silence while I connect up the mulcher and turn it into mulch. Fortunately, I do have some other citrus coming on, including one that I've got 4 types of lemons on already. I've got 2 Spanish varieties, an Italian variety, and a Maya, because I only need a little bit of that because I can. And that's why you get into that sort of stuff. Just you do stuff not because you need to, because you can and you enjoy it. First thing I ever grafted was an apple tree onto it was a Japanese apple variety onto a Granny Smith. It fruited that year, and I was hooked on grafting. Okay, so come and see us at Werribee Park Heritage Orchard. And if you think that's too far, we have people coming from Oakley and all sorts of stuff to be with us every week as part of it. So the Eureka lemon is the best choice. The Maya lemon, which is also quite common, is great to go in a pot without any mucking around, but it's not a very good lemony lemon. So it's, people like it in drinks and things like that, but it's not the sort of thing you'd squeeze on a piece of fish or use the zest off, because it's supposedly, they're not quite sure, but it's supposedly a cross between a lemon and an orange. So even though it's very good in pots, it's not really much chop as a lemon. But if you like them, they're fine. And if you've got a heap of them, make a pizza base, like a plain pizza base, put some fresh mackerel fillets on, then wafer thin slices of Maya lemon, some dill, some salt and pepper, and then throw that into the pizza oven. Absolutely amazing. Nice mackerel fillets spread out over it, fresh mackerel. Oh, amazing. And you can also do it with just Maya lemon and sugar as a dessert pizza. And they're the only 2 recipes I've ever found which are good for Maya lemons. In terms of limes, the Tahitian lime, which is a very commonly available one, is great for pots. I have it growing in the ground here, and I have to cut it back a lot because it just produces way more limes than I can use. If you're from a Middle Eastern background, it's also known as a Persian lime in many countries. So if you've been looking for a Persian lime and wondering why you can't find one in the shops, it is the same thing as a Tahitian lime. And that's a fact that's greeted with a great deal of pleasure by some Muslim friends of mine when they hear that, because they've been looking for it for years. It's also apparently the same lemon that's used in the key lime pie, but my American sister-in-law isn't too sure about that, so we'll leave that one go. So look, Tahitian lime is great. You'll have limes on that most of the year, and if limes in your cooking is your first choice to go to, I'd definitely go for the Tahitian lime, and that'll go straight into a nice big pot. While we're on the subject of pots too, you can buy stuff, terracotta pot sealer, which stops those pots from wicking away the water too quickly. Another name for terracotta pot sealer is a bottle of cheap PVA glue. So just whack a layer of that into the pot. You can get stuff called Bondcrete, which you can seal it with, but that's just a more intense version of PVA glue. And PVA glue is quite safe. It's the same stuff, the bell-shaped thing made of seeds you hang up for the budgie. That's stuck together with PVA glue. So it is fine. It's fine within food. And if you happen to have just a bit of house paint sitting in the shed, paint the pots with that, or even don't paint it. Tip it in, swirl it around, and tip it into the next pot. So terracotta pots do work better if they are sealed, so that the water isn't wicked away too quickly by the pots. Just about every type of citrus will fit. And for me, I tend to select those citrus in a small space, those citrus that will keep giving in small amounts over most of the year. And for me, that's lemon, lime, and perhaps kumquat, and the Macrit lime. used to be called the kaffir lime. That has, it's a term, has racist origins. So we're trying not to use that these days, even if we've only used it in ignorance in the past. So the Macrit lime, you'll still see it called the kaffir lime for a long time yet, is a popular choice if you like Southeast Asian cookery. It does produce a bit of fruit, but I tend to pick it off and compost it before it develops, simply because I want the leaf. I find the fruit on it. Some people use the zest and that. I find it's just too perfumey to put in drinks and things, though. But it is so nice just to be able to step out and grab a bit of citrus to liven up a dish or a glass. Any questions?
Yeah, we've got someone who's wondering about what pot size for citrus.
As big as you can. You're probably looking at 40 litres plus. Um, but if you're buying some of the miniature stuff like the patio limes and that, it's worth looking at the label to see what they recommend in ultimate size as it gets bigger, and a lot of them too will have a QR code you can click on to get more information as well. It is worth doing your homework on anything that you decide that you're going to buy. Um, can I strongly recommend you don't get half wine barrels? I know they look great, and that's sort of about the size we're talking about. But when you try to change the soil in them by tipping it, they just fall apart. You can get pots that are specifically made to fit into half wine barrels if you really got to have that half wine barrel. But the best things to put in half wine barrels is wine.
Or full
Sorry,
wine
my throat's
barrels.
going a bit. Um, did I cover that question? I think I did.
Yeah, I think so. Diane's wondering about finger limes and those varieties also suitable for pots.
Absolutely. Yep. And while it's great to grow native stuff, keep in mind too that the reason we have gall wasp in Melbourne is because it comes from the finger limes. They evolved with it and they don't react to it the same way. And as for finger limes are spread across Australia, we'll spread gall wasp across Australia.
Mm.
So for those of you to whom it matters, gall wasp are Australian. Uh, Any other citrus questions?
Yeah, how much water do they need from Claudia?
There is a device you can get to that will actually measure the moisture in the soil. Here's one here. If I can get on the camera, that's one
There it
there.
is.
I have a pack of 5 here, and I have 5 others over here. Stick your finger in the soil. If it feels cool and slightly damp with any of your plants, that's fine. Okay, so they need regular dampness. They don't want to have wet feet. And of course, remember that you are responsible for, if you're on a balcony, for that water draining off down onto the neighbour's washing and things like that. Although a little trick you can use to avoid that a bit is if water tends to run off your balcony, even if you're renting, get a tube like with the gun applicator of silicon and do a silicon bead right round the edge of your balcony, and it just keeps those smaller amounts of water from going over the edge. And then if when you move out, you can just strip it away, usually all in one big go. A nice thick bead of silicon right around. Comes in different colors and all sorts of stuff. You can stick down other things, particularly if it's your balcony. You can make all sorts of changes and that to it, but a simple bead of silicon's a great way to do it, just to control where that water ends up.
Great. We've got a question from Trish. Hi, Trish. When should you prune citrus? She's saying I can easily prune, say, a third, or do I have to be careful which wood? I think she means in terms of sort of
Yeah.
fruiting, that sort of stuff.
Look, general advice: deciduous trees, prune them after you pick the fruit, but evergreens like citrus in particular, when it comes to winter time, they're still actively growing and very often they're producing fruit. If you prune them in the colder weather, they will put on a flush of new growth that's going to be very sensitive to frost. So recommend that if you want to prune your citrus back, do it any time of the year when it's relatively warm, but don't start doing it till late September, till after the frosts have gone. Less of a problem if you've got a nice frost-free small garden area, that's fine. But pruning them any time will encourage a flush of new sensitive tender growth. So use that as the only guide that matters. It's not like with apples and things where you've got the fruit being produced on the same fruiting structure year after year. They will just produce multiple fruiting points, which you increase in number by trimming back to a couple of buds, so you get more branches growing up from each point rather than just the one continuing.
Great.
Shall we continue on?
Let's do that.
Okay. I don't want to go into espalier too much, other than say, first of all, espalier is not how Harry Potter prunes his trees. It's that's a yeah, never mind. I won't explain the joke. You either get it or you don't, that one. Look, it's espalier, both formal and informal ways of doing it. They're a great way of turning a tree into a two-dimensional space, usually against the wall, but you can even make it into a dividing screen or prune it up to the top of a fence so you can screen the neighbours and all that sort of stuff. So use it as a privacy screen, but you'll still get an enormous amount of fruit doing that. Don't go and buy specialty thing, the ones I think they're about $190 at the place with the big green shed, and it's a lemon or an olive tree you can get that's been clipped back onto a piece of a small piece of treated pine trellis, and it's about $185. That's definitely not worth it because it's about 10 minutes work to do that. All they've done is bend all the branches back and clip them off to the trellis, and then cut anything off that sticks out too far. And that's all you do as well. You can do the more formal, like the apple tree in the left photo there. But the lemon there, that's a great way to do citrus. And just to have that crowd of growth there covering the wall and producing fruit is great. It'll also keep the sun off that wall and stop your house from getting too hot if that's where the wall is. So mount a trellis just off the wall, and even if it's just a couple of centimeters, just so you can twist things round and under. A piece of reinforcement mesh is a really good way to do it, and just mount with a few bolts. Paint it with some primer, metal primer if you wish. But even if you let it go rusty, it'll still look good anyway, and the greenery will soon cover all that anyway. And just any branch that's in the way, bend it a bit while it's young, ideally, and tie it back to the structure. And you just keep doing that. The same thing can be done with grapes and olives and all sorts of stuff. And so don't go and buy those things in the pot, the ready done, because they've already reached the limit of their trellis anyway. So they're just going to cark it and fall over, and you're going to have to repot them pretty much as soon as you get them home. So they're really not worth it. Any espalier questions?
I know you didn't want to spend too long on it. I've just put in some notes around winter pruning that we had on the website, but nothing specific.
Okay. No. Yeah, look, espalier can be formal or not, but it's just a way of pulling your tree back into two dimensions. So you end up with this tree behind your other plants or behind your seat, but it's out of the way, but not taking up any space, but it's still heavily productive. So it's worth looking into. All right, here we are, the berries. Now, someone did ask about the brambles and the canes, which is like your blackberries, brambles mostly, and you're related to blackberries. And then you got things like raspberries are your canes, but there's a lot of intermediate varieties because they've crossbred so many of them. They're all absolutely fine to grow on balconies in pots. unless you can't get past them without getting hooked up every single time. So as a plant, they're absolutely fine to grow on the balconies and small yards and things like that, if you have the space and the ability to get them out of the way of people brushing past. The downside is because if you can get past them so easily, then why aren't you filling that space with more plants? Eh? There's always room for more plants. Don't let raspberries get in the way. If you really want to do raspberries, they go great in the polystyrene box. If you get the variety called Heritage, which is an Australian developed variety, then all you have to do is cut them off at about 300 mil high every year, and that's it. And then cut out any weak stuff. So they're done different than all the other brambles and canes and things anyway. The other good thing about berries is you can tuck them into little niches and things around, in smaller pots around your bigger pots and get them going in all different spots. And that enables you to make really good use of every little bit of space, but also every little bit of microclimate, the cooler ones, the shadier ones, the warmer ones, and so on. Some of the more common berries would be blueberries would be probably the most popular by far on small gardens because they are a bush that you can keep to just about any size. You do need two complementary varieties to get good crops. Again, do your study or at least read the label and see what variety it suggests. When you pot them up, they need an acid soil, as many of you would probably know. And the easiest way to achieve that on a small scale is just buy a bag of azalea mix and plant them in that. So it'll be called azalea mix or acid lovers mix, that sort of stuff. Not the sort of acid lovers that are a social problem. So look, azalea mixes there. You can do things like put sulfate of potash in and that sort of stuff. But if you buy the azalea mix, you know that it's got the right pH and it's all ready to go. They're a little bit more expensive than the other things, but blueberries will last quite a few years, but you do need to prune them. But they can produce enormous amounts of berries in a small space. And unlike the ones at the supermarket, they taste like blueberries. Some of the others, a couple of my favourites. First is up in the far right there, is the Cape gooseberry. Now that's in the Solanum family, the tomato, chili, capsicum family. Also includes eggplants and potatoes and all that. But the Cape gooseberry, I noticed one of the companies is selling it as Inca berry because it's from South America. They often make up names for these just as sales points. But the Cape gooseberry is easy to grow as a tomato, but it'll last for several years. They tend to self-seed, and you get these berries inside a husk when that's really papery and going see-through. Ideally, the berry will be nice and golden. It'll be tangy, but it'll be delicious and sweet. And it's great because you can send kids out to pick some, and they don't have to wash them because they come wrapped in paper. So I would strongly recommend them. They're easy to get hold of. Grow them from seed or buy a little plant. They also, you can expand the number you've got by squishing a ripe fruit onto some soil, and they also grow very well from cuttings. And they tend to be a bit leggy and that sort of stuff, and whippy rather than climbers. They're stragglers, but you can just sort of spread them up through other plants and rails and all sorts of stuff. They're fairly short-lived, but you'll find that you'll get them popping up here and there where the fruit have fallen into other pots, and they're easy to transplant. So they're one of my favourites, both because I like them and because they're not fussy about soil. Down below that is the goji berry, that red berry there. You know, those musty, horrible things you buy at the health food shop. These are the live version. And they're much more tasty. They're very leggy. I cut mine down to about waist height every year, and they'll keep coming back for several years. Very easy to grow from cuttings, fairly easy to find in nurseries, and they really are, in ideal conditions, they will produce heaps and heaps of fresh goji berries. Or if you're into Chinese medicine, wolfberries, same thing. Keep in mind that some varieties will have thorns on them, but you can just tie the long whippy branches up into bundles and just tie them out of the way, hang them over the balcony if it's not going to affect any passers-by. But they will produce heaps and heaps and heaps, and really tasty. And both those two I've just mentioned really do cope well with heat as long as they've got a reasonable amount of water. Some of the others, pardon me for a minute while I move all your pictures of yourselves out of the way. Some of the others, the less common ones, so a bit harder to find out about. So we've got the Cape gooseberries I've talked about. Currants are great if you've got a bit of a dappled shade sort of balcony. I find red currants are the most likely to produce a crop here in Melbourne. But if you've got a warmish balcony or small garden, you may find that it doesn't get cold enough to encourage the fruit to set. It doesn't get enough of what's called chill hours, and that will affect some varieties of both raspberries and berries. There's other things around like the service berry, which is basically like a blueberry that grows on a larger bush that can grow to a tree if you let it. I grow that. It's really quite nice. Goji berry, Chilean guava, and cherry guava, both are really good. Both will take some shade, some semi-shade, and both will produce large amounts of fruit. The cherry guava, which I didn't list there, easy to get, can be pruned a hell of a lot, won't grow from cuttings, but will grow from the seed from fresh fruit very easily. And they come in a red version and a yellow version. And if you don't know which one you like, grow both. They can also be trimmed into a hedge, or a fedge, as we call them in permaculture. In other words, a hedge that will feed you. And feijoas fit into that category as well, but they're not berries. Okay. So there are quite a few things around. Some are not really worth the effort. I would say that the Amelanchias you'll come across occasionally on the more exotic websites aren't really worth it. I'm about to cut mine out to make room for more service berries. It does grow into a rather attractive tree. Look, there's a whole heap of them that'll come and go on the market. Most of the bush tucker ones aren't worth the effort in this climate, although midgeonberry are really quite good. Do we have very many questions?
We've got one whether you need 2 blueberry plants to get decent crop.
Yes, that you need 2 complementary varieties, so not 2 of the same variety.
Okay.
And I would also tend to buy them from different places or different brands, simply because if you see a whole row of blueberry pots at the nursery, they're probably all from cuttings from the same plant. So they're genetically identical. And that's what you don't want when you're getting cross-pollination. You want that pollen from another variety to cross-pollinate with it. There are some that don't require pollination around these days, but you're always going to get a better crop with a cross-pollination. Keep in mind too, but that just means you've got 2 blueberry bushes, both producing blueberries, and if you put them in matching pots and spread them equally distance apart, they can form part of the balanced structure of your garden. Where if you've got 2 right next to each other, which they don't need to be that close for cross-pollination, then it can make the garden look unbalanced. So when you're putting things in big pots, tend to buy the pots in pairs, and then you can put them right next to each other, or you can put one up either end and then work your way in like a chessboard, but have those matching pairs to balance the whole garden. And that balance may be based on the very dead center of your balcony, or that balance may be based on what you see when you're standing in the door onto the balcony. Because you may not see all the balcony, but that balance, that pleasing to the human eye balance is going to depend on what you see looking out through your big glass door or windows. Okay, so balance is a visual thing, not necessarily an actual thing. How's that for being Zen? Okay, succulents. Now, there's not a huge range of succulents to grow, but all of them are great in super hot in super hot balconies. Down the bottom there, we've got what we commonly in Australia call a prickly pear, but that's not actually what it is. The prickly pear that those of us who are old enough will remember. Well, actually, I remember my grandparents talking about it. So, you know, those of us who are really old will remember that huge areas of Australia were covered in prickly pear, which is a different species to the one that we've got here in the picture. The prickly pear, which is the invasive one, has got a very round leaf. It's a Puntia stricta something or other. But the one that we commonly call prickly pear that people of particularly of Mediterranean descent will grow in their gardens is a different variety. It's called a Punta ficus indica. So because in many countries it was commonly known as the Indian fig, even though it's from Mexico. Um, it's not illegal in most situations in right through Victoria and the eastern states, and it's really dead easy to grow. And you can prune off the pads so you can get it to head in one direction. So you end up with the pads grow off the pads grow off the pads, and you can actually grow some organic barbed wire right across the edge of your balcony. That's a good way to deal with things like blackberries and stuff too. Grow a bit of organic barbed wire right across, so they're out of your way, but they're going to interfere with anyone that tries to get over. They're going to be a bit of a big statement piece on a balcony or small garden, but they can also be a terrific centerpiece, and they can produce huge amounts of fruit. But you have to be careful of the little hairy spikes called glochids. Um, you do need to get rid of them. The easiest way is when you pick the fruit with tongs, drop them in the bucket of water overnight, and they all fall off. Inside, they taste like mostly a bit like a melon, and they really are quite delicious when they're fully ripe. You can eat the pads as well. They're called Nepali or tuna. I think probably pronounced tuna, and they taste like cross between okra and green beans. Easiest way to plant them: drop them on the ground and walk away. If they're on any sort of soil, they will grow. So they're very easy to grow. And pruning, use a cricket bat. By far the easiest way. Okay, because they can be quite prickly, not necessarily great for that space. What is better for a balcony space, though, is the other two. Now, the top one there is pig face, which is native. It's in the Portulaca family. And if you get right varieties, after those very attractive, bright flowers, those neon flowers that you see on them, um, the base of that flower will, like all fruit, will start to swell up and generally will turn pink. And I managed to find a picture there. Um, the taste varies a lot. I found one that was really, really good that I propagated and had all round the garden for many years until disease wiped it out. But it tasted like really sweet watermelon. And it's just this tiny little thing. It's great as a ground cover rather than having grass in the front yard or, beside the driveway or down the middle of the driveway. If you've got a dirt strip down the middle, it's great, but it does like plenty of sun. Otherwise, it does tend to get a bit moldy. So it does need good drainage and plenty of sun. So it is a great one to have in those odd little spots. And people generally ignore it other than see the pretty flower. Now, the two pictures on the right, they're my own photos, not stolen off the internet. Well, I give them credit, but they're not off the internet like most of my other photos. That's the dragon fruit that I grow at my place. Last year, I got 5 fruit off it, which was the first time it's fruiting. I grew it from just a piece that someone gave me, shoved it in a big pot. It's gone up all the way to the top of the pergola, which is about 3.5 meters, and then it's done a loop around the structure, and now it's hanging down. And it's that hanging down part is important. Until your plant is hanging down, then you won't get any flowers and then fruit on it. You have to look around a bit for the varieties. There are self-fertile varieties, which is a good idea because we don't have the South American bat that normally does that work. We don't have that around. Moths will do a bit. You can even go out with a little paintbrush and transfer pollen. But there are some varieties like I think it's Red Star Dragon and a few others, pretty easy to look up that will produce no frost tenderness at all, but fantastic on a balcony. And they will grow in a pot and they'll go meters and meters and meters all the way up and hang down again. Or you can just have them go up a couple of meters and then hang over the balcony or hang back down the wall. And if you've tried dragon fruit and bought it at the shop, you probably go, yeah, what's the big deal? It looks really pretty. When you ripe them on the plant and pick them ripe, they taste like, oh, there's lychee in there, there's pear, there's melon. They are absolutely superb. They're just so tasty. So definitely worth the while. They don't take up much space because you can just tie them up against the wall. They won't climb by themselves. They're a straggler rather than a climber. The flowers, you can see there's my hand behind there. They are very big flowers. And even when they're not in flower, they do look quite exotic. How are we going for questions on that one? Are we cactus yet?
No, we are. There was someone who was also growing a dragon fruit quite successfully, and there are a few questions around what pot size again you would recommend for successful dragon fruit.
Again, about a 40-litre pot, like
Okay.
the big black pots. Particularly if you see them planting trees established trees in your street, go and ask them if you can have the pots because they're the exact right size for so many balcony things. You can buy them, but then one of the councils I was doing some work for, they rang me up and said, do you want some pots? And I went down to their depot and filled my friend's ute with 300 pots, although big pots, up to 90 litres from there, and didn't make a dent in the pile they had.
Mm.
So they are there, they're commonly used, they are out there, but they're expensive to buy. And if you buy one that's being used, they're a lot better, a lot better. And don't forget, of course, if you don't like those black pots, sit them in something else or scrub them up with a bit of steel wool so they'll take a layer of paint.
Great.
Any other succulent questions?
No, not at this stage, just some
Nothing,
comments
no
around
succulent Chinese meal? No.
no.
Okay, we're moving along okay, which is good because it's 8:15.
Yep.
Climbers. These are really good. Some of them require fairly large pots, but they're great if you can start on a balcony. They're great if you can start them on the ground and grow them up in the balcony. So you're stealing a bit of root space. Kiwis, so they can get very big and heavy, and passion fruit vines. Now, passion fruit vines are okay in a fairly broad, shallow pot. Kiwi fruit get big enough, and you do need a male and a female. They probably are best coming up out of the ground, but some of the kiwi berries are good for a balcony. But most varieties of those little kiwi berries do need a male as a pollinator, but there are some on the market that don't need the pollinator. And the pollinator is actually just the regular kiwi male. So you've already got kiwi fruit going. You can put in the tiny little hairless ones as well. Grapes are easy. If you've got a friend who's got a grape that you like, then anytime now, just take off a few pieces off it when they're pruning it. Bits about 300 mil, as long as a ruler, light brown, about as thick as between a chopstick and a pencil. Just get half a dozen of those, shove them in a pot. They'll probably all take, as long as you get the buds facing the right way up. They're really, really, grapes are just so easy to grow from cuttings that if there's one you like and you know where there is one, go and get some cuttings off it. It really is that easy. And the idea is you grow them up and across in a way that suits you. So it might be at the top edge of a very sunny balcony, or a bit further back to get it out of the way if you want that sun to come through. But of the three vines, they're the ones that are completely deciduous and lose all their leaves and let the winter sun through. So they are the most the handiest to use, and they are by far the hardiest of them all. If you cover a balcony with passion fruit, you can get lots of passion fruit, but you're going to have that wall of green, which can be great against a wall, but not very good if it's covering your whole balcony and blocking the sun. So, but look, grapes are easy. They will live for, well, they'll outlast any of us. So I strongly recommend them. And once you've got them going up and across your balcony to where you want them to be, then you just cut back to anything coming off that permanent part of the structure, cut it back for two, three, four, whatever buds, and in winter when it's dormant, and just let it shoot again each year. All right, I dashed through that. Any climbers questions?
Yes, quite a few have come through. So again, pot size for passion fruit. Would you say like 40 liters again, or
Yeah, for anything that's going to be there and living for quite a while,
yeah.
that's probably about your standard. Keep in mind too that the way the balcony's set up, if you get square pots, they are more expensive, but you won't lose so much space. If you think of a row of circles against each other, then you've got those triangles being missed out on, and you can fill them with other stuff to some degree, but square pots will make every last bit of use of that space while still having the same volume. So keep that in mind. Unfortunately, they do tend to be more expensive. Although Maribyrnong Council were changing the way they dealt with rubbish in the office, so I ended up with about 50 plastic waste paper bins. So I got the drill out and drilled lots of holes in the bottom edge, and ended up with a whole lot of very useful square pots. So keep that in mind. Reuse is always a good idea.
Mm. And Marie's wondering what's the like how long will a passion fruit live for?
In good conditions, about 7 years, and you can't replant one in the same place, which is if it's in a big pot, that's no problem. You can change the potting mix and off you go again. What tends by about the sixth or seventh year, the skin's starting to get thick, and you're not getting you're getting fruit with nothing inside them occasionally, and that's the sign that the passion fruit virus has caught up with it, and it's almost time for it to go bye-bye.
Mm.
I recommend getting rid of the entire vine before you bring the new one in. I also recommend don't get the grafted varieties because the rootstock will often take over and you get those very fine leaf stuff coming up and growing everywhere. That's very vigorous, produces heaps of flowers, but doesn't actually fruit. And so I would recommend the passion, non-grafted black passion fruit. Um, in Melbourne. If you've got a very hot balcony, you could go for some of the fancier varieties. You could even, if it's a really hot balcony, you could even do some of the Jamaican water lemons and things like that that are the size of your head. Um, if you've got a really, the right climate for them. And you can buy them. You can buy a lot. The more tropical passion fruit, get them from Daly's nursery, which is online.
Yeah, okay. And someone's wondering about transplanting a passion fruit from the garden into a pot.
They've got a very broad fibrous root run that doesn't like
Mm,
being disturbed. Um, you could try, and if it's grafted, then you're going to be in a world of pain because it'll disturbing the roots causes them to shoot. Now, if it's not grafted, then any shoots that come up are going to be productive anyway, no problem. But I would suggest it's probably going to be easier to just go and buy another one.
yeah.
The non-grafted ones are really quite cheap, and you certainly can't plant another one in the same spot for many, many years.
It's in a community garden. They don't want it, or
Oh,
they
yeah.
don't like it.
Yep. Well, you can certainly dig it up, but into a pot, you can try. It's not going to hurt to try,
Mm,
but I wouldn't bother if it's grafted. If it's non-grafted, you could probably grow some cuttings from it to be sure first.
okay,
And then once they're established, get rid of the offending one.
great. That's all.
All right. Uh, we're getting near the end. So I'm sort of on time-ish. Rhubarb, I know it's not really a fruit, but we eat it as a fruit, just like we know that tomatoes are fruits, but we eat them as vegetables and all that sort of stuff. Um, Rhubarb is a really easy one. Nice big. It's great in the deeper foam boxes. Every couple of years, you dig it up and divide it. I strongly recommend that you get a variety that's called something like Perpetual or Everbearer, because a lot of the rhubarbs go dormant in winter, which is not much use from my point of view, because that's the only time I tend to eat rhubarb. When you have rhubarb and custard and apple and all those sort of things. Um, Although my wife, who's Japanese, does make salty plum paste out of rhubarb, and even her Japanese friends cannot tell the difference. Like 2 or 3 sticks of rhubarb. There's plenty of recipes online, and you can make Japanese salty plum paste if you're into Japanese cooking. Or Persian rhubarb chicken. The best thing to do is make rhubarb champagne, but you need about 2 kilos of rhubarb stems to do that. Okay?
I love
There's a
rhubarb.
sorry.
I love rhubarb.
Well, I like it in the right time in the right place. And if you've got old aluminium saucepans, boil some rhubarb leaves in it, and they'll go really nice and shiny. It cleans them up really well. Just don't leave it in overnight because it'll eat right through
Mm.
them. Any rhubarb questions?
Yes. How often do you feed your rhubarb and what do you feed it?
Compost, chicken poo pellets, um, anything like that. You don't want anything that's artificial and high nitrogen. Will just give you lots of leaf and skinny, flavourless stems. I've listed on the page, bottom of the page there, a few suggested varieties. Wandered Winter, Winter Wonder, Ever Red, or Sydney Crimson are ones that tend to stick around all year. They do like a really decent feed. Um, if you plant the crowns on a bit of an angle away from each other, you can get a couple of them in the same pot, even 2 or 3 in the same pot. And when they get a bit bigger, dig 1 or 2 of them out and start them off in another pot. As long as the crowns are pointing away from each other, they will actually do really quite well. But they do like plenty of organic matter to feed on and plenty of water. But
Mm.
the leaves in the right situation can look really quite tropical on a balcony, like give you that Balinese sort of look, but with dessert afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah's having some issues with some brown mottling on the rhubarb stems, whether you know what that might be.
There's a few sort of rots and things that they may be sitting in too much water. It's worth digging a shovel next to them down about a shovel depth and just see what the soil's like down there. If it's heavy clay, if they're in a pot, they may just need some repotting. But usually that's the thing is just either not enough air circulation or just too much water. You, if you really want to get fancy, you can use an antifungal on them. But the best antifungal, the easiest one, is 1 part full cream milk to 10 parts water. So like a liter of water, 100 mils of milk, and spray that on them. Works great for black spot on roses too. And that's not some herbal hippie hoodoo stuff. That's been scientifically proved to be as good, if not better, than any fungal treatment on the market. And the other fancy one that we're using in the orchard at Werribee too is what's the silver nitrate? No, not silver nitrate, silver colloidal silver. That's the one. Yeah, don't
Mm.
put silver nitrate on. That's for photos. Colloidal silver, which is used in a lot of health applications. It's also good on fungal diseases.
Great.
But dig them up and see what they need. Any other rhubarb questions?
That's it.
Right. Okay, racing to the end, the Solanum family. Now we've talked about the Cape gooseberries, but there's also the Pepino, which will still produce very large fruit when in a very tiny pot. I've seen one sick-looking little plant sitting in a pot with a fruit half the size of the pot, at least, a bit more than half the size, just sitting on the ground next to it, still attached to the plant. Grow very well from cuttings. They're easy to find in nurseries, and I use them as ground covers under fruit trees where the trees are in the ground. and just hack them back every now wherever they brush against the ground, they'll put down more roots. They need to be really nice and ripe like this with bold purple stripes. They're, for some people, a bit of an acquired taste. They taste like a cantaloupe that needs to be a little bit sweeter, but they're just so easy to grow. And of course, down the bottom here, we've got the Tamarillo. Some of us who would grown up calling it a tree tomato, easy to get hold of, very easy to grow from cuttings or from seed. And they are related to the tomato, but they are used as a fruit. But you can use them as chutneys and things like if you've got too many. If you cut across on them and dip in boiling water like you peel tomatoes, you can do that with them. And because of the unpleasant taste of the skin, getting rid of the skin like that is great. I usually just cut them in half and eat them out with a teaspoon like a boiled egg, though. They really are delicious. There is something tomatoey about them, but they're quite a bit sweeter. Poached in a vanilla syrup with real vanilla bean, absolutely fantastic. So the Tamarillo and your Pepino and your Cape Gooseberries are ones I strongly recommend. We looked at some of these. The cucamelon. They're only about the size of a football shape, but the size of a marble. They will come back for several years. Easy to get hold of these days. They're only technically a fruit, but they're something you can grow in and around other stuff. The yacon, definitely not a fruit, but the roots of them actually taste like they have a sort of a sweet appley taste, and they're very, very juicy. And the daylily, all parts can be eaten. I tend to just pick the flowers and use them in salad. Very slight lemon taste to them. I think we've covered everything there. One last slide to consider is if you got pets. Um, if you've got a female dog, it's easier than having a male dog because the male can cock their leg on your plants. If you got cats, they'll get up and into everything. I remember the last cat that we had, brought it home and it just dashed straight to the pot plant in the lounge room and pooed in it because it had been holding on all day. Um, you can do things if you're having trouble with pets getting into soil and that, get some plastic garden mesh. Um, of whatever size holes you like, and just cut pieces to fit in top of your pots. You can even put mulch over the top of them, but they'll know. Bamboo skewers stuck everywhere. A good way to repel birds and cats and dogs. And even just orange peel, fresh orange peel. Other citrus work pretty well too, but orange and mandarin are the best. Just when you have your morning orange out there on the balcony, drop the peel around the pot plants until the cats learn to go elsewhere. Because it is just a matter of breaking their habit because they will keep doing it. And I think that is my last slide.
Great. Oh,
And it's 8:33. No.
we did really well with time. I know there's some more questions that people had, and Scott, are you okay if we hang around for a little bit longer to answer a
Oh,
few
look, you've
more
got me talking about gardening.
few more
I'll
questions?
talk to the cows come home. That's fine.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'll just do some wrapping up notes, and if you have to leave, yeah, please do. But if you wanted to stick around, you're more than welcome to. So, thank you again all for coming along. Like I said, if you haven't come across us before, we're a sustainable gardening program in Metro Melbourne. I'm going to put up the link to our website. If you aren't able to stay, but there's still questions that you have, please check out our website. We've got so many resources from previous workshops and webinars. So if there's anything you're interested in, pop it in the search function there and it should come up with any luck. But yeah, if there were more questions that you had that I have missed, there's quite a long chat, so I'd love it if you retyped it in so it pops up down the bottom again. That would be great and we can revisit it. The other thing that I just wanted to mention was, yeah, we've got a bunch of free events coming up all throughout the month. From all over Metro Melbourne as well. So I'll pop that in now. There's native plants, there's composting, there's working with weeds, growing from seed, gardening in small spaces. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, yeah, please check out our website and come along. And I'm going to stop
And if you want to hear
recording.
me ramble on some more, there's plenty of my old videos on the MySpace